The grave was unmarked. That was the first thing the surveyors noticed on that cold October morning in 1978, when they came to map the old cemetery outside Keystone, South Dakota. The Black Hills had gone quiet, the mines mostly played out, the boom towns fallen to ruin, the land reclaimed by the slow, indifferent creep of prairie grass. They were there for a new road, a highway that would cut through the hills and bring tourists to Mount Rushmore, a project that would disturb the dead if they weren't careful. So they walked the cemetery, charting the stones, the family plots, the crumbling obelisks that marked the pioneers of the 1870s and 1880s. And then they found it. A grave. But no headstone. Just a single marker, a piece of rusted iron driven into the earth, with no name, no date, no inscription. Just the faded remnants of paint, a single word, barely legible, paper. The surveyors assumed it was a family marker. A name, perhaps. Paper. An odd surname, maybe German, maybe something else. They recorded the grave in their notes, marked it on the map, and moved on. But the thing about forgotten graves is that they have a way of calling out. The county clerk, a woman named Eleanor Vance, had been working in the courthouse for 30 years by then. She knew every family, every plot, every scandal that had ever passed through the dusty ledgers. When she saw the surveyor's notes, a cold chill ran down her spine. Because she remembered something. A story. An old story her grandmother had told her when she was a girl, sitting on the porch in the long summer evenings. A story about a woman and her children. A story about the winter of 1880. A story about something that had happened in the hills, something so terrible that the courts had tried to bury it. She found the file in the oldest part of the courthouse, in the basement where the rats nested and the water leaked and the documents crumbled to dust. It was a thick folder, bound with string. The label read, Territory of Dakota, County of Lawrence. Petition for custody and re-children of Anna M. Ryerson, *. But inside, there was something else. Something the clerks had tucked away, something they hadn't wanted anyone to see. A single piece of paper. Yellowed, brittle, written in a spidery hand. A letter to the judge, dated February 14, 1882. Your Honor, it read. I write to you with a heavy heart and a troubled conscience. The children of Anna M. Ryerson were not taken by the Indian. They were taken by a man with a paper. A man who wore the badge of the law. I know not where they are. But I know they are not dead. I know they are not lost. They are hidden. They are hidden in plain sight, and the truth will not stay buried forever. The letter was signed with a single name, a friend. No one ever discovered who wrote it. No one ever found the children. And for nearly a century, the truth lay buried in the courthouse basement, waiting for someone to ask the right questions. The story you are about to hear is true. It is the story of a crime that has never been solved, a family that vanished from history, and a conspiracy that reached from the mining camps of the Black Hills to the highest offices of the territorial government. This is the story of the lost children of the Little Wound. Anna Marie Ryerson was born in 1852 in Stockholm, Sweden, the daughter of a ship's carpenter who had fallen on hard times. The family emigrated to the United States when Anna was 14, settling in the growing Swedish community in Galva, Illinois. By all accounts, Anna was a beautiful young woman with fair hair, blue eyes, and an independent spirit that would prove to be both her greatest asset and her deepest curse. In 1874, she married a man named Lars Erik Ryerson, a farmer from the same Swedish community. They had 3 children, 2 daughters, Linnea and Ingrid, and a son, Johan. Life was hard, but it was good. The Ryersons worked their land, attended the Lutheran church, and dreamed of a better life. But Lars had a restlessness in his soul. He had heard stories of the Black Hills, a place where men could strike it rich, where gold lay waiting in the streams and veins of the mountains. The discovery of gold in the Black Hills in 1874, at the mouth of French Creek, had set off a stampede of prospectors, despite the fact that the land was sacred to the Lakota people and guaranteed to them by treaty. Lars Ryerson was not a bad man. He was simply a man caught in the grip of an American dream as old as the country itself, the belief that the land belonged to those who could take it, that gold was a gift for the brave, and that a man could reinvent himself in the West. In 1878, he uprooted his family and moved them to the Black Hills. They settled in a mining camp called Lead City, a rough and violent place where men drank, fought, and killed with impunity. Anna was horrified by what she saw. The camp was a lawless territory, with no sheriff, no court, no protection for a woman and her children. The land was contested, the government had not yet formally opened it to white settlement, and the Lakota people watched from the surrounding hills with a mixture of anger and despair. But Lars was undeterred. He had seen the gold, and he was convinced that his future lay in the rocky soil of the mountains. He staked a claim, built a cabin, and began digging. He found nothing. For 2 years, Lars Ryerson worked his claim, and for 2 years, he found only traces of gold enough to keep him going, but not enough to make him rich. The family survived on meager rations, supplementing their diet with game and the occasional gift from sympathetic neighbors. Anna kept a garden, mended clothes, and taught her children to read from a worn Bible that had traveled with her from Sweden. The winter of 1880 was the hardest. The snows came early, and they came deep. The passes were blocked, the supplies ran low, and the cabin was barely warm enough to keep the children alive. Lars began to drink. He grew bitter and angry, blaming Anna for the family's misfortunes, for dragging them to this godforsaken place, for failing to give him sons strong enough to help in the mines. In January of 1881, Lars Ryerson died. The circumstances of his death are murky. Some accounts say he died of a fever, succumbing to illness after months of exposure to the elements. Others whisper of a mining accident, a rockfall that crushed his legs and left him to bleed out in the snow. But the most troubling account comes from a neighbor, a man named Henry Dolan, who later told a story that he had seen Lars arguing with another man outside the saloon in Deadwood the night before his death. He had heard shouts, then a shot. The next morning, Lars was found frozen in a ditch, his body unmarked, the cause of death recorded as exposure. Anna Ryerson was 28 years old. She had 3 children under the age of 10. She had no money, no resources, and no family to turn to. She was, in the brutal calculus of the frontier, helpless. The Black Hills in 1881 were no place for a woman alone. The camps were dominated by men, prospectors, gamblers, claim jumpers, and outlaws. The few women who lived there were either the wives of miners or the working girls of the saloons, women who had found their way to the frontier by their own grit and determination. Anna Ryerson might have been able to survive as a seamstress or a laundress, skills she possessed in abundance. But the camps were not exactly bustling with work, and the people who could afford to pay for such services were few and far between. She made a fateful decision. She decided to return to Lead City, the larger settlement where her husband had first staked his claim, and petition for a homestead of her own. Under the laws of the territory of Dakota, a widow could claim a parcel of land, 160 acres, so long as she was willing to live on it, cultivate it, and improve it. It was a slim hope, but it was her only hope. She arrived in Lead City in the spring of 1881, her children trailing behind her like the tail of a comet. The town was in the grip of a frenzy. The Homestake mine had struck a rich vein of ore, and the population had swelled to nearly 3,000 people, a raucous mix of miners, merchants, and dreamers. The streets were muddy, the saloons were crowded, and the makeshift jail was always full. Anna found lodging with a Swedish family, the Larsons, who took pity on her and gave her a room in exchange for help with the cooking and the cleaning. Her children were placed in the small school run by the local church, a building of rough-hewn logs with a dirt floor and a single stove. It was there that she met Jeremiah Riley. Riley was a tall, gaunt man with a sharp jaw and piercing blue eyes. He was a lawyer, a man of education and refinement in a town that prized neither. He had arrived in Lead City a year earlier, drawn by the promise of gold that flowed through the legal disputes over claims, inheritance, and property. He was a man who knew the law, who understood the intricacies of the territorial code, and who had a knack for winning cases. He saw Anna Ryerson and saw an opportunity. According to the records of the probate court, Riley offered to help Anna secure a claim to her husband's mining property, a small plot of land that had yielded some gold but had been largely played out. He would represent her, he said, at no cost, in exchange for a portion of any future profits from the claim. Anna, desperate and grateful, agreed. But Riley had other motives. He began to court Anna, a strange and uncomfortable courtship that alarmed the Larsons and prompted whispered gossip among the small Swedish community. Riley was not a man of faith. He was known to drink, to gamble, and to keep company with the women of the saloons. He was, in the eyes of Anna's family, an unsuitable match. But Anna was a woman alone, and she had no other choices. Riley was educated, articulate, and willing to help her. She did not love him, but she was learning that love was a luxury she could not afford. She agreed to marry him. But the wedding never happened. What happened instead is a matter of record, though the details are obscured by the mists of time and the deliberate destruction of evidence. On the night of July 4, 1881, Anna Ryerson vanished. The 4th of July in Leeds City was always a wild affair. The miners celebrated with drunken abandon, firing guns into the air, lighting bonfires, and engaging in impromptu wrestling matches in the muddy streets. The saloons stayed open all night, and the fighting spilled into the alleys, where men settled disputes with their fists and their knives. Anna Ryerson had attended the celebration with her children, watching the fireworks from the steps of the Larson house. According to the Larsons, she had seemed happy, almost carefree, as if the weight of her recent troubles had lifted. At around 10 o'clock, she put her children to bed and told Mrs. Larson that she was going to step out, just for a few minutes, to fetch something from the market. She had been gone for less than an hour, she said. She would be back in time to tuck the children in. She never returned. The Larsons searched the town, asking everyone they met if they had seen Anna. The miners, drunk and distracted, had seen nothing. The merchants, closing up their shops for the night, had not noticed her. The sheriff, a man named Henry Jacobs, was summoned to the house and took a report. The search was minimal, almost perfunctory. Jacobs asked a few questions, looked around the surrounding streets, and declared that Anna had likely gone off with a man. Perhaps she had run away to Deadwood, he said, or perhaps she had found a new lover and abandoned her children. The Larsons were horrified. Anna would never leave her children, they insisted. She was a devoted mother, a good Christian woman. Something had happened to her, something terrible. Jacobs shrugged. Women disappeared in the camps all the time, he said. They got lost in the mountains, or they fell into the mines, or they ran away from their debts. There was nothing to be done. But the Larsons did not give up. They contacted Jeremiah Riley, the lawyer who had courted Anna, and demanded that he do something. Riley, to his credit, seemed genuinely concerned. He organized a search party, a group of volunteers who combed the hills around Leeds City for 3 days. They found nothing. Anna Ryerson had vanished, leaving behind 3 children and a trail of unanswered questions. In the days following Anna's disappearance, the question of the children arose. Who would care for them, and what would become of them? The Larsons were prepared to take them in, though they could barely afford to feed their own family. They were good people, and they could not bear to see the children turned out into the streets. But Jeremiah Riley had other ideas. He appeared at the Larson house on the evening of July 7, 1881, with a piece of paper. He said it was a will, a legal document that Anna had signed before her disappearance, in which she had designated him as the legal guardian of her children. The Larsons were skeptical. Anna had not mentioned any will, and she had certainly not discussed the children's future with them. They asked to see the document, but Riley refused, saying it was a private matter, and that the custody would be decided by the court. He filed a petition in the territorial probate court, requesting that he be appointed the children's guardian. The petition was supported by a statement from the sheriff, Henry Jacobs, who swore that he had been told by Anna that she intended to marry Riley and that she had entrusted him with the care of her children. The case was heard on July 15, 1881. The Larsons were represented by a lawyer, a man named Samuel Berman, who argued that Riley had no legal standing, that the will was likely a forgery, and that the children were better off in the care of the Swedish community. But Riley had the documents, and he had the sheriff, and he had the court. The judge, a man named John Morrison, ruled in favor of Riley, granting him temporary custody of the children pending a full hearing on the matter. The children were removed from the Larson house and taken to Riley's home, a small cabin on the outskirts of town. The Larsons protested, but they were powerless. They could not afford a protracted legal battle, and they had no standing to challenge the court's decision. The file in the courthouse basement told the story in dry, bureaucratic terms. The petitions, the affidavits, the judge's order, all of it was there, meticulously preserved. But the letter, the mysterious friend's letter, was not part of the official record. It had been filed separately, tucked into a folder labeled miscellaneous and left to rot. The letter had been written by someone with intimate knowledge of the case, someone who knew the players and the stakes. It mentioned that the children had not been taken by the Indian, a phrase that suggested a deliberate effort to deflect suspicion. It mentioned a man with a paper, a man who wore the badge of the law. Who was that man? The file gave no answer. But there was another document, filed in 1883, that provided a clue. It was a report from a Pinkerton agent, a man named Nathan G. Smith, who had been hired by the Swedish community to investigate Anna's disappearance. Smith's report was damning. He had interviewed witnesses who said that Jeremiah Riley had been seen arguing with Anna on the night of July 4, 1881. He had discovered that Riley had been in debt to several men, including a local gambler named Joseph Gambler Joe Anderson. He had also learned that Riley had a history of violence, and that he had been accused of assaulting a prostitute in Deadwood. Smith had also discovered a curious detail about the will. It was dated June 15, 1881, a date on which Anna was known to have been ill in bed, unable to even speak. The will had been witnessed by a man named James T. Cooper, who later confessed to Smith that he had not seen Anna sign the document. He had simply been told to sign, and he had signed. The will, in other words, was a forgery. But the investigation had been cut short. Smith had been threatened by Sheriff Jacobs, who warned him to leave town or face the consequences. Smith had left, but not before sending his report to the Territorial Attorney General. The report was never acted upon. The more Eleanor Vance dug into the files, the more she realized that the disappearance of Anna Ryerson was not an isolated incident. It was part of a pattern, a network of corruption that had spread like a cancer through the territorial government. The men who had been involved in the case, Sheriff Jacobs, Judge Morrison, Jeremiah Riley, were not lawless outlaws. They were respected members of the community, men who had been appointed to positions of authority and trust. They were, in the words of one historian, the good old boys of Lead City, a tight-knit group of men who looked out for each other and who did not tolerate outsiders who asked too many questions. Eleanor found a second letter, filed in 1884, from a woman named Sarah Green, who claimed to have been a servant in Riley's house. She wrote that she had seen the children, that they had been locked in a cellar, that they had been starved and beaten. She wrote that Riley had sold the children to a man named Silas Thompson, who had taken them away to parts unknown. The letter was crossed out, a heavy line through the text, the writing barely legible. Someone had tried to destroy it. But the story did not end there. Chapter 7, The Children's Fate. What happened to Linnea, Ingrid, and Johan? The records offer no definitive answer, but there are clues. A woman named Sarah Thompson, the wife of Silas Thompson, filed for divorce in 1886, alleging that her husband had abandoned her and their farm outside Deadwood. In her divorce petition, she mentioned that her husband had brought 3 children into the home, children he said he had adopted from a family in Lead City. The children had been with him for a year, she said, but he had treated them poorly, and she had been forced to send them away. She did not say where they had gone. A census record from 1890, preserved in the Territorial Archives, lists a woman named Ingrid Ryerson, age 14, living in a household in Rapid City, with a family named Jensen. The head of the household was a man named Sven Jensen, a Swedish farmer. The record suggests that Ingrid was adopted by Jensen, and that she eventually married and started a family of her own. But there is no record of Linnea or Johann. They simply vanished, as if they had never existed. Chapter 8, The River of Stone. The story of the little wound might have ended there, a forgotten tragedy in the annals of frontier history. But the curse of the gold was a thing that could not be destroyed. It could only be passed on. Eleanor Vance, the courthouse clerk who had discovered the secret file, spent the last decades of her life trying to solve the mystery. She wrote letters, interviewed descendants, and petitioned the State Historical Society to open an investigation. She was met with silence. The families of the men involved, the Rileys, the Jacobs, the Morrisons, were powerful in the region. They controlled the politics, the economics, and the narratives of the past. The story of Anna Ryerson and her children was an embarrassment, a stain on their history. They had no interest in seeing it exposed. When Eleanor died in 1998, her files were donated to the local historical society, where they were filed away in a cardboard box labeled Miscellaneous Local History. They were forgotten again. But the truth could not stay buried forever. In 2012, a construction crew working on a new housing development in Leeds City unearthed a human skeleton. The remains were lying in a shallow grave beneath an old oak tree, just outside the town limits. The workers called the police, who called the anthropologists from the state university. The bones were old, decades old, perhaps more than a century. They were the remains of a woman, aged about 30, with signs of trauma to the skull. The forensic analysis revealed that the woman had been struck on the head with a heavy object, likely a hammer or a piece of mining equipment. Her legs had been broken and bound, and her body had been dumped in the grave in a hurried, careless fashion. The woman had been killed. The case was too old to be prosecuted, and the bones were too degraded to yield a DNA profile. The identity of the woman was never confirmed. But the anthropologists who studied the remains noticed something interesting. The woman's hands bore the marks of hard labor, the kind of work that a woman might do in a mining camp, mending clothes, doing laundry, or tending a garden. The woman had been identified by her clothing, which included a simple cotton dress and a pair of leather boots, handmade, with stitching that was distinctive and unusual. The stitching, the anthropologists noted, appeared to be of Swedish design. The bones were reburied in the local cemetery, in an unmarked grave, next to a marker that read simply, paper. In 2024, a woman named Eva Lindquist, a descendant of the Swedish community that had once lived in Leeds City, found a letter in her grandmother's attic. The letter was written in Swedish, and it was dated January 7, 1882. It had been sent to her great-great-grandmother, a woman named Astrid Dahlberg, who had been a close friend of Anna Ryerson. The letter read, in part, My dearest Astrid, I am writing to you in secret, for I fear that if my words are read by the wrong eyes, I will suffer the same fate as poor Anna. I saw what happened on that night in July, the night she disappeared. I saw Jeremiah Riley take her away, her hands bound, her mouth gagged. He said he was taking her to the jail, that she had been accused of a crime. But I knew better. I saw the look in his eyes. It was the look of a man who had decided to silence her forever. I do not know where he took her. I do not know what happened to her after that. But I know she is not dead. I know she is alive, somewhere, hidden, waiting for someone to find her. The children are gone, too. They were taken by the man with the paper. I do not know where they are, either. But I know they are not dead. They are hidden, and the truth will not stay buried forever. I am writing to you because I know you will keep my secret. I am writing to you because I know that one day, someone will find this letter and will know the truth. God bless you, Astrid. God keep you safe from the men of the law. Your friend, Maria. The letter was signed with a name that had been crossed out, the ink smudged and illegible. But there was a clue. At the bottom, in small letters, a postscript, the friend of Anna. The story of Anna Ryerson and her children is a tragedy that has haunted the Black Hills for more than a century. It is a story of corruption, greed, and the failure of justice. It is a story of a woman who dared to be independent, and who was destroyed for her audacity. The fate of the children is unknown. The identity of the killer is unknown. The location of the remains is unknown. But the mystery endures, a shadow that hangs over the history of the region. In the cemetery outside Keystone, the grave that first drew Eleanor Vance's attention remains unmarked, a silent testament to a story that has never been told. And in the courthouse basement, the files remain, waiting for someone to ask the right questions. The lost children of the Little Wound are still out there, somewhere, hidden in plain sight, waiting for the truth to set them free. But the truth, as the letter said, will not stay buried forever. One day, someone will find the children. One day, someone will solve the mystery. One day, the truth will emerge, like a river breaking through a stone. Until then, the bones remain silent, and the secret is kept.